All right, I have 12:10 p.m. by my clock, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. I'm going to just go ahead and mute everybody that's not already muted, and then at some point I will ask you to unmute and introduce yourselves, and then at the end we'll have some time to unmute and have some discussion and question and answer. Can everybody hear me okay? Is the level good? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate it. It's great to see you. This is a first session that we've done in this kind of format and using new technology, which some of us no doubt have used a lot over the last year during the pandemic. This is the first time that we've done a webinar like this with a live demo on the organ. So I appreciate at the end we get feedback on how the voice comes through, how the format works for you, and how the organ sounds. Obviously, it's not going to be the same as if you were here in the studio with me or if you were at your church, but we'll do the best that we can, and hopefully we get something beneficial out of it. For those who don't know me, my name is Robert Potterton. I'm an associate here at G. Paul Music, which is New England's representative for Allen Organ Company for over the last 30 years that they've been representing Allen Organ. And I'm also organist choir master at Christ Church Episcopal in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. So I split my time between the two places. Today, I'm in the G. Paul studio in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've been a musician for over 20 years. I did my undergraduate work at Houghton College in Western New York in organ performance and composition, and I did master's degrees in sacred music and sacred theology, focusing on worship at Boston University, studying with Peter Sykes. And I've done some hymnology work with Carl Daw as well. Some of you might know his name from writing a bunch of hymns that we sing every week. I would like each of you to introduce yourselves, so I'll call on you one by one. If you could unmute yourselves at that point and tell us your name, where you're from, and what kind of instrument you play on a weekly basis, what your connection is with what we're doing here. So why don't we start with Kathy?
Hi, thanks, Robert. I am Kathy Marker. I am the organist, choir director, bell choir director at the Madison Baptist Church. On St. Patty's Day of 2020, we installed a brand new Allen G330, and then the Sunday following, we closed down for COVID. So we have not had a dedication. People haven't really heard it live yet. But we have something to look forward to.
Great. And that's Madison, New Hampshire.
Madison, New Hampshire, yes. And I'm coming to you today from Meredith, New Hampshire.
All right. Judy next.
Right. So I'm the organist and choir director at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Gardner, and I also work as an alternate substitute organist at Our Savior Lutheran in Westminster. The organ at St. Paul's, I believe, is a Conn, and the organ at Our Savior is an Allen. They're both electronic organs, and I don't think I need to say any more about that. So that's what I do. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to know any more about me or not. There's too much to tell. I'm ancient. Well, yeah. So I have a degree in music from California State University, Fullerton, and a master's degree from New York Institute of Technology in business. And yeah, life has been long. So yeah, that's about it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kenneth. You have to unmute yourself so we can hear you. There we go.
Sound better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm the baby in the family. I didn't start anything with regard to organs and music until a couple of years ago when I got one for nothing, and I've since graduated up. I do tinker, play on an Allen at the Masonic Lodge, local Masonic Lodge. And I currently have a Lowy Stardust, which is I have at home here. I'm a graduate mechanical engineer, and but I've never taken lessons before in music, and so I'm still learning, and that's one of the reasons here. I might find out something I didn't know before.
I hope you do. And we're all still learning, right? It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. There's so much to cover. Thank you, Kenneth.
Yeah.
Loyal, are you there? All right, we can come back. How about Ingrid?
Hi, I'm Ingrid. I actually am an organist and been for quite a while to the West Acton Baptist Church. We're a very small church now with a very small congregation. We have an Allen, maybe an MDS 45. I don't know if that number is right, but a 2-manual electronic organ. I was trained as a pianist and never taken any organ lessons, so I'm always looking for new ideas and new ways of using what I have. Yeah, but I've just been a church musician forever.
Very glad you could join us. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to just go over the format for today's session and kind of what we're going to do for the next 2 sessions. These are kind of meant to be a pair, but like I said in the email that came out from G. Paul, if you can just come to one, if you can come to multiple, there's no specific order you need to get the information in. There's different things for each. So we're going to do an overview of the instrument that I'm playing here, and I have different camera views so you can see it a little better instead of just looking at me one-on-one here. And then a presentation, which should be about 15 to 20 minutes, going through our topic today, which we'll get to in a minute. And then I'd like to finish up with Q&A, comments, and then discussion amongst us, kind of building on the topic and share knowledge with each other. So let me show you what we have here at our studio. The organ I'm going to be using for these sessions is a G330, right here in our studio in Worcester. This was purchased in 2019, so it's pretty brand new. And it's equipped with moving draw knobs, wooden keyboards built by Allen, Genesis display, which you can't really see, but it's up here, a full color touch screen. And it also has the optional Genesis voices that go along with that. So not just the voices that are built into the organ, but a lot more that you can apply, and we'll be covering that in a later session. We are aware that many of our installations in New England are 2 manuals. So the material we're covering today is applicable to any organ. If you just have a 2 manual or 3 or 4, it's something that you can carry through. Obviously it'd be a little bit different, but we want to make sure it works for everybody. When I'm sitting down at a console, I like to orient myself right away and see where the controls are for each division, especially couplers, because sometimes they'll be up here on the stop rail and sometimes they'll actually be draw knobs that are assigned. And especially if you're working with a slightly smaller instrument that doesn't have a very big specification, you might need to couple down from the swell to the grate, or from the swell or the grate to the pedal to give it a little more power, a little more richness. Then you want to know where those couplers are at a moment's notice, especially if you haven't assigned pistons in advance. Allen organs are intentionally designed to be consistent, not just with the sound, but also the console layout and design of a typical pipe organ, so that anybody, regardless of your background or what instruments you've been playing, you're going to feel instantly comfortable, even with all the new features that it has. The draw knobs here are arranged by division, just like they would be on a pipe organ. You have pedal and swell over here, and then the grate and positive or choir, depending on how it's laid out for your organ. And then on the stop rail up here, we have Genesis voices, which are kind of additional voices. Like if you played an older Allen organ, the alterable tabs that you'd have for assigning extra voices that aren't in the organ for each division. All of your couplers are up there, your MIDI controls, and your tremulants. So pretty much everything else you need is up there within easy reach. The full color touchscreen on this series of organ, Genesis, functions like the earlier console controllers. You may have seen they have the knob that you have to turn through and buttons to click. It's all touchscreen now, just like modern computers. Makes it even easier to get to all the many functions and features. Today's topic in this first session is creative service playing, console setup, and registration. Obviously, some of this information is going to be familiar to you, and some of it may introduce you to new things that you can try, and I hope that it does. I'm going to switch back to this camera for a minute here. All right. So, as liturgical musicians, we have to be prepared for the expected and the unexpected, as I'm sure you've all come across. We might not be the most visible people in a worship service, but congregations often depend on our leadership in setting the mood and the pace of worship. And a worship service, especially during this pandemic time, is often the high point of many people's weeks. And we want to be aware of that and to do our best to support them. This organ has a nice full specification as a 3 manual. So it has mixtures and reeds in every division. We know it can handle whatever we can throw at it. Congregational song, choir anthems, voluntaries. Just like a pipe organ, it's got a variety of sounds and combination of sounds at our disposal. The main goal of which is to help encourage singing. We're talking about creative service playing. That's the main music that happens in pretty much any service is going to be leading people in song. We want the organ sounds to be supportive, but not overbearing. They need to hear themselves sing as well, not just the organist. And we want it to be practical and effective, but also creative and engaging. So principles, as we know, are the backbone of the stop list, and they're usually voiced so that they provide foundational support needed for congregational song, whether it's hymns or service music. So on here we have the principle 8-foot. Nice rich sound. This, by the way, if you're familiar with the different suites that Allen organs have now, there's 6 different organs, at least 6 different organs built in to all the new instruments that are coming out. For today, I'm just using the classic Allen specification. So those are samples from pipe organs from a bunch of different instruments over the years that they've curated to get their distinctive sound. They also have German and French, American and English specifications in here. We're not going to be touching on that today. So just this one specification. So that's their classic Allen principle. You can fill that out with other 8-foots, as you would if you were supporting congregational singing. We have a 8-foot string stop, a viol. And an 8-foot harmonic flute. Slight bit of chiff on there, but pretty broad. And then when you bring all 3 together, really supportive. Fill that out even further with the 4-foot and the 2-foot, reinforcing their harmonics and developing a full chorus. So here's 4-foot octave and 4-foot flute in addition. Then the 2-foot 15th. Really encourage people to sing, and it brings out the melody. I love mutation stops. We're talking about fractionals, 5 1/3, 2 2/3. But we have to be careful when we're registering them for pieces sung by people, I've found over the years, because it can confuse the foundational pitch at which they're singing, especially if it's on the lower end, when you can really hear those upper harmonics, the 5ths and the 3rds that it's bringing out. And if you go to town with the mutations, it can kind of sound like a Hammond B3, you know, when you pull out all the draw knobs at the same and you don't adjust them. And it's really, really quinty sound, and it's hard to sing along with. So that's not what we're going for with something in the pipe organ or church music vein. I might use a 2 2/3 to reinforce a softer solo reed, give it a little more of a high end, a little more brightness, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a little bit. Or fill out a registration that's weaker on the high end. But generally, I reserve mutations for soloing out melodies or for repertoire that's not being sung, voluntaries and things like that. Likewise, you want to be careful when you're using mixtures and reeds, especially if the mixtures are very bright or if the reeds are more solo reeds instead of chorus. Sometimes it's a very gray line between which are chorus reeds and which are solo reeds. And a lot of them, especially on Allen organs, you can use in both applications, depending on how you have the volume set. But you want to be aware of that when you're registering. Yeah, it's hard to resist the urge to over-register sometimes because, like everybody, we love the majestic organ sound, and congregations love it too. There's a reason it's called the king of instruments, and we want to demonstrate that every opportunity we can, especially during festive seasons of the year. But that can wear on you, whether it's over a span of a season or even within a single service, if you're using a lot of that really heavy organ sound. Especially with mixtures and mutations that muddle the melody, like we said. We want the singers to know what they're supposed to be singing and when they're supposed to be singing it. We're trying to help parishioners and elevate their worship experience, not necessarily impress them with the organ's abilities or our own abilities, although we hope that they notice those as well. We put in a lot of work, and we want them to be proud of the instrument in their church as well. Now, obviously, if you're going through a service, you can do a lot of hand registering. If you're playing a quiet voluntary or light accompaniment that's only a few stops, it's easy to take them on and take them off. When you get into playing hymns, more complex anthems, or repertoire that utilizes more than one set of voices, that's when things can get more complicated. And that's what we're going to focus on next, looking at pistons. Pistons are your friend. That is my motto for this session. I'm going to move overhead now so you all can see what we're going to be doing next. So on this organ, we have 10 general pistons to control voices in every division of the instrument. Very easily accessible, and then of course the wonderful cancel button, so we don't have to worry about accidentally pressing something. We also have 6 divisional pistons up on the swell here, on the grate, and down on the positive that can control sounds just for those divisions. Also 5 pedal divisionals, and those are toe studs down here on the right side, and on the left side, generals 6 through 10 can be controlled with toe studs as well. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility. We also have 3 expression shoes or expression pedals. One is for the pedal, the grate, and the choir, all controlled together to affect the dynamic level. Another one is for the swell. And on the right, we have the crescendo pedal. Who here will confess, along with me, that you have used a crescendo pedal when it really was not necessary? I have definitely done that, especially early in my career. I try not to now. The advantage, of course, of using the crescendo pedal is it makes it easier to alter the voices that are being used. If you have to bring the volume up really quickly and down again really quickly, that's the fastest, easiest way to do it. But I encourage you to spend time with your instrument to set up things in advance so that the crescendo isn't used on a regular basis. It's a wonderful thing to have, but you don't want to rely on it. It can be helpful with something like the Vidor Toccata. I'm getting that ready for Easter, for a postlude, where you have to do that. It needs a little extra push at the end. If you're going really quickly from a closing hymn into a postlude and you don't have time to switch things over, then that's a good use for the crescendo pedal. So the difficulty we have in setting up the organ in advance is that we don't want it to limit our creativity. We don't want to say, this is where the pistons are set, these are my registrations, and once you get going in a service, you feel like you're locked into that. You have to really think through how you use your instrument on a weekly basis in a service to try to build in creativity. How do you set pistons based on how you use your organ in a typical service? I'm going to show you just a few of the methods that I've used over the years, talk about the pros and the cons of each, and demonstrate them here on the organ. So the first one that I've seen most organists use is arranging generals consecutively and progressively from softer to louder, and then using divisional pistons for soloing out a manual, for simpler registrations, straightforward anthems or voluntaries, kind of your go-to. I know I'm going to use the grate for this, I know I'm going to use the swell for this, so they're right there for you, so you don't have to hand register. Or for chimes or other percussion instruments, things you use occasionally but not all the time. So I'm going to use the hymn When I Survey the Wondrous Cross to demonstrate a little bit of how this can work. I have generals 1 through 10 set up progressively softer to louder. So here's the grate on on general 1. I'm going to hold it down and go through all the way up to 10. You might hear a little distortion on the high end when we get to the full organ. It's a pretty gradual step, and I feel like 10 is a good number when you want to have more of a gradual dynamic shift and more variety for hymn singing as well. So for this hymn, what I'm going to do is I've set on the divisionals up in the swell. Swell 1 is the celeste string combination. A nice soft accompaniment. And then on the great divisional 1, to pair with it, I've assigned the chimes. Anytime you need the chimes in service, it's right there. Especially on this organ, because it's actually right around the corner and you can't see it when you're sitting at the console. You have to kind of lean over here to see where it is. And I'm also going to bring on the pedal to match with it. I just have 2 softer 16 foots in the pedal, so it's not going to get in the way of the softer accompaniment. You want to make sure you have that balance between whatever your accompaniment figure is, or if you're just using principles like 8-4 or 8-4-2 on the Great Manual to accompany hymn singing, you definitely want to have that 16-foot bass tone, but you don't want it to be so, you don't want to have like a loud 4-foot in the pedal that's going to get in the way. So I'm going to use these chimes as an introduction for the hymn against the swell, and then I'm going to move into the progressive pistons so you can see how you can vary based on the text. One of the things that Carl Daw always said in some of our classes was, the text is king. If you're accompanying a hymn, hymns are poetry, he would say. And he's right. We want to bring out the meaning of the text without overdoing it. Now on the generals that I have set up to move progressively, I've also set the other divisions, the swell and the positive or the choir, to move progressively. But because the main principles are usually on the great, that's going to be your go-to manual. And on a 2 manual on the bottom, on a 3 manual usually in the middle, unless you swap things around. Like a French organ would be, you know, basically the greats on the bottom where everything couples down. So in the swell, it moves. It's generally a softer sound, so if you have a softer stanza, you can definitely use that to support congregational song. And as I move into the second half, 6 through 10, that's where I have the swell coupling down to the great. On a lot of these Allen organs, the reed choruses are up in the swell. So when you get to the louder registrations, you want to couple those down to the great. On this organ, there are no reeds in the great. There's not even an 8-foot trumpet on here. So you need to rely on drawing reeds from the other divisions or using the Genesis voices that we'll talk about next week. So option number 2. Oh, before I move ahead with the other divisionals. So the other divisionals here, I have the string celeste in the swell. The way I have this set up is swell 2, swell divisional 2, is a trio solo. It's an 8-foot and a 2-foot flute. So I paired that down with an 8 and a 4-foot in the great, on great divisional 2, so they can sound together. It works really well for other solo voices you'd use, like the cornet combination. That's the 8/4, 2 2/3, 2 and 1 3/5. I have that on the swell up here for another option. And to go with that, on grate 3, I have an accompaniment. And on the grate there, that's just an 8-foot flute with 8-foot string. Really simple accompaniment stop. But you know, because the numbers are paired, that they're going to go well together. It's a lot easier to remember. And then I bring on the reeds in the second half of the divisionals. So it's easy to remember. I have solos on 1 through 3 in the swell, and then 4 through 6 are the reeds. 4 is just an oboe with a 2 2/3. Adding in the trumpet with 5. And finally, the 16-foot basson to fill out that full chorus reed. I'm going to use that one on a little bit. On the grate, I have the chimes that I played before. The trio solo on 2 and 3. I have a trumpet solo on 4. So if you're playing through a hymn and you have a softer registration up here in the swell, all you have to do is hit grate 4 and you have your solo to solo out the melody. And then grate 5 with 16-foot. It's a little bit easier to hear, it gives a little more push. All right, option number 2 that I've seen done is splitting your pistons up. So say you have 1 through 10 like this organ. You could use 1 through 5 for one application and 6 through 10 for another application. For example, say 1 through 5 are for service music and hymns, and 6 through 10 are for voluntaries versus anything congregational. So you're separating them out depending on how you're going to use them. That's especially helpful if you don't need as much dynamic contrast in what you're using for service music or hymns. If it's more of a simple 8/4, maybe an occasional 2-foot, but not as much mixtures and reeds if you have a smaller spec. I'm going to switch to memory level 2. One of the things that's great about these new organs is they have a 128 memory levels that come as standard. So you don't have to worry about running out of them. All right, on the Skinner Moeller pipe organ that I have up at Christ Church Fitchburg, I am blessed, or I guess you could say spoiled, with 20 general pistons, really more than I need for the kind of services that we have. The first 15 are in the usual position on the left side, so it's 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15, and the others are spread around trying to be helpful at other positions in the keyboard where you can need a general. So I've used 1 through 10 for accompanying congregational and sometimes choral music. So I have a pretty wide dynamic range. And then I use 11 through 15 for voluntaries and anthems that change each week, but they don't exceed 5 sets. So how this would work is I'm going to use the hymn, Were You There? 1 through 5 are set up here progressively, just like before we had 1 through 10. So on the grate, it sounds like this. Now, obviously, you don't want to change registrations every phrase of a hymn, but just to make it shorter for you. That's just 1 through 5. That's as loud as that one gets. It's not a lot, and 1 is still pretty supportive, not too soft. So if you're going to use 1 through 5 for accompanying hymns, what you could do if you're going to split them up is use 6 through 10 for your voluntaries. So I'm going to pretend we're playing through a very, very short service. And 6, general 6, is going to be for whatever my prelude is. And on here I have some strings. That's to be part of it. Okay. 8 is going to be for a choir anthem, a theoretical choir anthem that has a solo up in the swell for in between when the choir is singing. And then 10 is going to be our nice bombastic postlude. So let's do a service where Were You There is going to be the featured hymn. Here's our prelude. Now we're all set with the postlude. We move on to the next part of the service. And let's say it's the hymn. So we're going up to 1 through 5. So anything hymnic we're playing, we have those 1 through 5 available for us. We move into an anthem with 8. And that's using the oboe, the hautbois 8-foot, along with the 2 2/3 up in the swell. And then our postlude, we're ready to go. When the moment comes, we finish the hymn with whatever general we're using up to that point, and we have 10 ready to go. Using the crescendo pedal as desired. Option number 3, and obviously there's more than just these 3, these are just the most common. That would be using all the available pistons on one memory level for accompanying singing, whatever kind of singing it is, and using a different memory level for voluntaries and or anthems. The advantage of this is that you have way more pistons available for each of these functions, and it's great if you have lots of organ literature in your service, or if you're using different suites throughout one service, because then you can remember memory level 1 is for the Allen Classic, number 2 is for Schlicker, etc. The disadvantage is that it's another step you have to remember to change memory levels, which I have also definitely done multiple times over the course of the last 20 years. I'm changing back to 1 right now before I forget. Yeah, and maybe you've had an experience like me where people will notice if you accidentally engage like a fanfare trumpet instead of a flute chorus when you have an Agnus Dei going, something soft during Lent, and whoops, that wasn't what I meant to bring on. I'm on the wrong memory level. So there's danger in that, but it all depends on how your service goes. You have to be flexible. Related to that, one memory level could be used for traditional organ sounds, and another one could be used for orchestral or contemporary sounds, either within a service, if you have kind of a blended worship situation, or if you have different services. If you have a traditional service, you use this memory level. If you have a contemporary service or an evening service that has more contemporary sounds, you can use a different memory level. Makes it a lot easier that you know what's there and what's not there. So I'm back to memory level 1, and I'm going to use All Glory, Laud, and Honor. I'm going to use the chorus reeds on a divisional for a fanfare intro, and then I'm going to solo out that trumpet line. You heard a little bit of this before. So this is how I might do it. Full reed chorus on the divisional to start off. Gives you an easy way to just vary it up a little bit. And back to memory too, another application, if you're splitting things up by memory level. Say we wanted to do a traditional contemporary split, like I mentioned. I'm going to use Twyla Paris's Lamb of God, that some of you might be familiar with, and using some of the sounds through Genesis Voices. So on here, I have the swell divisional set for piano and strings. So that'll be my main accompaniment manual up here. Freeing my right hand up is a little bit easier to reach down here to the great and the positive for solos. And to go with that, let's start with a clarinet on the great. Acoustic guitar. And we need something in the pedal to support it that's going to sound a little more contemporary. So I've got some string ensemble and an electric bass. Gives it a little bit of a percussive kick that you wouldn't get from an organ sound. And you could do something like this. And you have all your divisionals available to you. So let's say we want to bring in a little bit of a traditional sound with some handbells. That last one is a teaser for what we're doing next session. All right. So at this point, I'm going to open it up, and I ask that you can either raise your hand or use the little raise hand emoji that's in Zoom, so I can call. If you have any questions at all, anything about Allen organs, anything about what we talked about today, anything you'd like to see for future sessions, and any of your experiences on any of the things that we've covered to add that would be beneficial to the group. Let's start with Judy. She's already unmuted. Go ahead.
So, I should preface this by saying that, like others, like many, my background was as a pianist first. I trained as an accompanist for that bachelor's degree long ago. Mm-hmm. And so pianists who are transplanted into becoming organists, as I was, we start out with working on levels of sound on a single keyboard with, and we create these different options for expressiveness, with pedaling and mm-hmm. and all of the things that you have as an arsenal as musicians, right? And so over the last, I've served in 5 or 6 different congregations since I was in school, And each one had a different organ, which required a different learning process to know how to come up with the best options of sound that it had available until the last one before I left California, which was a blended pipe, as you know, it was an Allen blended pipe.
Mhm.
And so that was lots of fun because it had more capabilities. So I think that the hardest task for me has been to learn how to think in multiple levels that the organ has available in terms of keyboard and registration.
Mhm.
And so sometimes, often, the easiest way for me to plan for what I'm going to play and come up with the best option is to work on like different keyboards, separating it out different keyboards. I'm not as advanced as you are in terms of adding levels within the levels of the different keyboards. So I guess my question is, did you personally, did you start out as a young organist learning already about what these different levels were from the very get-go, or did it just gradually become more easy over time because of the different instruments you played?
Mhm.
And then lastly, do you find that it's easier for you to focus on the registration differences that you generally will go through during any given service, because you improvise so well and don't have to be responsible so much for looking at music? Because I'm always looking at the
Yeah.
page too. So there's that too. And it's like dividing out the brain into all these different things. So I guess that's a complicated question, but that's kind of what I was thinking about as you were playing.
Well, those are great and great observations too. I never really thought about um, being freed up from the sheet music, but that would definitely be helpful, especially if you have an instrument you're not really familiar with. It's one less thing to worry about. I haven't felt any more relieved when,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I don't know how beneficial it is. As far as I would say for me personally, it was mostly experiential. As I went through, I didn't take formal organ lessons until 2002,
Well,
2001, 2002.
that makes me feel much better,
Yeah,
actually. There's hope, right?
yeah. I mean, I started at piano in the late 1990s. I wanted to play the organ. I was just drawn to the sound of it. And I don't know if I mentioned before, but the church I grew up in, Missouri Synod Lutheran Church in Connecticut, had an Allen organ. It was a pre-digital 1960s analog organ. So that was the first organ I remember ever hearing, although I probably heard a pipe organ before that or some other type of organ. And it was definitely the first one I played. So I
Yeah.
have that
Yeah.
emotional connection to it,
Yeah.
and more of a familiarity with Allen organs because I've been playing them for so long. You definitely have way more variety in pipe instruments,
Mm.
and it's a lot harder to figure out how to register them, and taking into account other things like the room, the size of the room, and how the organ is speaking into the room. If you have strong singers versus weaker singers in your car, there's a million
Yeah.
things to take into consideration. I think it's the getting to know the instrument that you have and figuring out what its capabilities are and what its limitations are. So push it beyond what people think it can do, but not so far that it's not going to sound good.
Mm.
And it just takes time, to get to know it. And sometimes we look out when we're registering something and we'll come across a combination that is fascinating or does exactly what we wanted it to do. But I think most of it is just careful, preparation. When you're doing a congregational song, which we've mostly focused on today, you want to keep it simple. And early on, I went for that full majestic sound. That's what I wanted out of the organ. So I would push it. It would be louder and fuller than what was good to support congregational singing. And people might like hearing it, but it's not good for them over time. I found. I think it's an organ like this has such a big specification. It's tempting to overdraw and use all the resources on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
If you have good, well-voiced 8 and 4 foot principles and all foundation stops with the organ, that's the backbone. That's what you want to rely on, and that's, I think, what will get people singing better over time.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that we as musicians have a greater capacity for absorbing all of these different musical sounds, and we love hearing more and more and more music, but we have members in our congregations who do not have that same capacity that musicians have for sound and complexity sometimes. Yeah.
They always have to keep in mind how it sounds to them,
Hmm.
not just how it sounds to us.
Hmm.
Yeah, we do things that they don't notice, and they notice things that we don't notice.
Yep. Yep.
It's definitely a give and take. Kathy, what did you have?
Yes, this is kind of a more of a technical question for those of us using Zoom. With a multi-camera setup, are you using something like a Stream Deck to switch camera views, or how are you doing that?
Good question. This I'm doing right through Zoom.
Okay,
My-
so with your mouse.
Yeah, the overhead camera
Okay.
I have is
Yep.
USB, so it's just switching back and forth.
Okay. And you have your headset mic and the mic in the room, and so both of those are plugged into your USB interface in left and right stereo.
Yeah, I'm using the
Okay.
headphones I have into the monitor output
Okay,
on the Scarlett.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Did the organ sound come through okay for everybody?
Yes. Yeah, it was great.
Wonderful. We were
I
worried about
think that the traditional organ sounds came through a little bit better than the others.
Yeah.
Piano doesn't do well over Zoom, I find.
Nope. That natural decay and all the high end. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The organ sounds on here have a lot of low end, and you're also very close to the subwoofer. So I'm glad some of that came through.
So I just like to say thank you, Robert. I'm going to scoot now because my car is ready. I
Okay.
have brakes again.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
Thanks
Nice
for
to
joining
see
us.
everybody.
See
Yeah,
you later.
it's probably the best wait for a car you've ever had.
Absolutely, the most productive time ever.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear.
If nothing else, we've all learned how to multitask this year, haven't we? Thank you again.
I
Oh,
have
there's a message.
here. Yep. Oh, thank you, Loyal. Yes, I see Kathy's comment from before. You won't run out of memory levels. You only have to worry about remembering where you put things. And that's part of the familiarity with the organ. Even for this, I have a list that I drew up to keep right here of where everything was. Because this isn't my normal registration that I'd use. Once you get a couple weeks or a couple months in using the same thing, I think it becomes a little bit easier.